Perfect. Alrighty, so here with us today we have the Snowy Range Agricultural Issues team. So these kiddos have been hard at work since probably around October creating this presentation. They have to talk for 15 minutes over a controversial agricultural topic that is relevant in today's time. And then afterwards, they're open to answering your guys' questions if you have any. Students have to show a clear division of an opposing side and a side that's for the rules. So I'll go ahead and let the kids take over. And then, like I said, afterwards, if you guys have questions, you're welcome to ask them. Thank you guys for your time today.
Good morning and welcome to the newest episode of 307 Wired. Tonight, we are joined by a panel of those involved in the newest Bureau of Land Management's Conservation and Landscape Health Rule. Here with us tonight, we have BLM Director Tracy Manning, environmental lawyer Brian Mallory, and Native Americans Lands and Resource Officer Janet Robeson, Wyoming U.S. House Representative Harriet Hegeman, NCBA President Mary Isley, and Burgex Mining CEO Crystal Burgess. Thank you all for joining us. Recently, the Bureau of Land Management put into place the newest Conservation and Landscape Health Rule, instituting that conservation is a valid use of land similar to recreation, grazing, and development. As this rule begins to take effect, we have seen an uproar from opposing industry leaders, resulting in an active lawsuit initiated by the states fighting over the rule. Tracy, could you please provide us some background on the rule?
Thank you for having me. The Bureau of Land Management, often known as the BLM, implemented a new Conservation and Landscape Health Rule in June of 2024. The rule advances the BLM's multiple use and sustained yield mission by prioritizing health and resilience of public lands. In efforts to safeguard our public lands, the rule prioritizes protection of clean water and wildlife habitat, the restoration of lands and waters, and the making of informed management decisions based on science, data, and indigenous knowledge. New in this rule is the definition of areas of critical environmental concern, originally outlined in the Federal Land Policy and Management Act of 1976 and Restoration and Mitigation Leasing. Uses outlined in the original act include livestock grazing, energy and mineral development, timber production, outdoor recreation, habitat for wildlife, and watershed protection. This new Conservation and Landscape Health Rule helps us ensure that through the overlap of public land usage, we do not risk the health of our public lands.
Thank you for providing us background on the rule. Brian, could you please tell us about these restoration and mitigation leases?
The biggest concern leading to controversy is the new conservation leasing. These leases are for two purposes. One is compensatory mitigation. Leasing for compensatory mitigation helps project proponents offset the impact of development on public lands. The other is leasing for restoration, which allows third parties to work on public lands to restore them back to the health standard. Leases are approved on a case-by-case scenario. Lands that are available for restoration leases include degraded habitats, as well as intact landscapes and functioning ecosystems that can serve as compensatory mitigation for a particular action. Many believe this will lead to a land grab. However, the BLM clearly outlines that all leases are voluntary and will not overrule any previously allotted land. If a proposed lease conflicts with an existing authorization, then the lease will not be permitted. Previous leaseholders can work simultaneously with conservation leaseholders to utilize the same land for two different purposes.
Now that you have opened our eyes to these new leases, let's hear from opposing sides. Harriet, what prompted Wyoming to join Utah in the recent lawsuit? Could you give us some background and tell us some of the concerns you have heard from agriculturalists as a Wyoming representative?
Like Wyoming, Utah is home to millions of acres of public land managed by the BLM. The release of this new rule largely impacts the use of public land, urging the states to file a lawsuit against the BLM for state control of undesignated public land. Currently, 12 states have submitted a friend of the court appeal supporting the original lawsuit made by the state of Utah. Each state has their own set of reasons for wanting to claim their land, but in Wyoming, the abolishment of this new rule can impact up to 18 million acres of public land. Our Governor Mark Gordon describes his efforts in supporting the lawsuit as a concern for how federal land managers work with the states on land management policies. Politicians claim that federal ownership is siphoning away dollars that should go to the states. We hope that with the rallied support, we can continue to claim take the claim of not only Wyoming's public land, but other states as well. I would like to invite Mary, a fellow Wyomingite, to chime in on some of the reasons this will negatively impact the agriculture industry, not only in Wyoming, but as a nation.
Ranchers across the nation rely on grazing allotments authorized by the BLM to manage our livestock. Recently, the National Cattlemen's Association joined in support of this lawsuit against the BLM. This rule threatens generations of family ranching operations in the U.S. and undermines the balance of multiple-use management. Our association feels as though the BLM does not have the authority to create a brand new use for public lands without congressional approval, which conflicts with existing federal law. The Taylor Grazing Act of 1934 federally recognizes grazing as an appropriate use for public lands. Grazing provides a method of management for regions of land unfit for other purposes. This rule poses a threat to the continued authorization by opening the door for the BLM to limit the amount of allotted grazing permits. We encourage the BLM to protect grazing and view ranchers as partners in the conservation efforts and not an enemy.
That was very informative. Crystal, Janet, my understanding is there is review over the new way that public lands are managed, specifically with Indigenous tribal use of public lands. Could you tell us some more about that?
A major component of this new rule standardizes areas of critical concern as previously defined in the FLPMA. This change aids our tribes in protecting culturally relevant sites. Tribes now have the ability to help declare critical areas and work collaboratively with the BLM to use traditional and modern knowledge to help restore our public lands. Tribes around the country have spent centuries catering to the land. Therefore, we feel as though we have the historical knowledge to help. Years ago, we lost the right to manage our lands, so the opportunity to work collaboratively with the government ensures our culture is preserved. The Cow Creek Band of Umpqua Tribe of Indians is actively working with the BLM to incorporate tribal knowledge into various different projects, one of which is managing BLM land that borders tribal-owned land. This innovation of co-stewardship between the BLM and Indigenous tribes around the country gives us hope for a positive future.
Thank you for that information data you have. Crystal, could you please tell us about some of the concerns within the mining industry?
We feel this new rule is a huge overstep for the BLM, leading many natural resource organizations to join in on the suit against the BLM. Despite the BLM's claim on the contrary, the FLPMA includes a list of principal or major uses, including mineral exploration or development, domestic livestock grazing, timber production, and a few others. We feel as though if the Congress wanted these changes to be made, they would have been included in the original act. Two components pose a great concern to me. The first is the unequal footing we feel these new leases will provide. Director Manning acknowledged in a previous interview that energy production and mining would likely not be deemed compatible with the conservation lease, making conservation have a stronger foothold over mining. The second component is the new definition of areas of critical environmental concern. This new rule allows for critical concern lands to be larger and easier to designate, resulting in less available land for other resources, which will impact us and several other agriculturalists as well. Moving forward, boundaries need to be set in order to ensure that the congressional passed FLPMA is what we are following, not the BLM's latest idea.
Wow, I never thought about the impacts on the mining industry. Let's circle back to you, Janet. Another major component of the new rule also is the new regulations and definition of areas of critical environmental concern. Could you please give us some more detail?
Areas of critical environmental concern, or ACECs, are designated and protected by the BLM as originally outlined in the Federal Land Policy and Management Act. Under the new rule, the definition reads, the principal BLM designation for public lands where special management is required to protect important natural, cultural, and scenic resources, systems, or processes, or to protect life and safety from natural hazards. Under these new standards, the designated areas must meet 3 areas of criteria: importance, relevance, and special management attention. Using these new standards, the BLM can streamline the process for declaring and protecting critical areas, ensuring tribal knowledge is incorporated in the restoration planning. Other uses of the land can be fulfilled on established critical areas if they do not interfere with conservation efforts. This new opportunity for collaboration between tribal members and the BLM when discussing critical areas helps preserve our culture and is essential in ensuring the preservation of our lands.
We now know the new standard of ACECs that have to be met. My understanding is there is concern for the review process on any public lands moving forward. Mary, could you please describe the additional steps in the review process?
Under the proposal, all lands will require a Fundamentals of Land Health review prior to the authorization for use, a process currently applied only to grazing lands. However, the BLM already struggles with large backlogs in grazing permit renewals. Implementing this requirement would only increase the amount of allotted grazing permits. We understand the need to protect our lands, but if the process to lease public lands becomes too complex, we fear that the end result will be a land grab for all. It is currently unclear how these new conservation leases will forever continue to impact the future of grazing permits.
I don't know about the crowd, but I can feel the tension growing in this room. Let's circle back to you. Tracy and Brian, what are your thoughts moving forward with the discussion?
Our newest efforts to preserve our lands is not meant to target or overpower one use of the land over another. This is simply an effort to ensure that our lands can be used for generations to come. We want to emphasize that land will not be taken away from industry members and handed over for conservation use. Conservation leaseholders must present a plan that BLM advisories feel is feasible and continue to show progress throughout the lease. There is a desire for tools such as conservation leases to help offset the impact of projects on public lands. We at the BLM feel that this is the next step towards innovating our public lands for the greater good of our future.
Adding to Tracy's statement, we have also seen several conservation groups file a motion to intervene in a lawsuit filed by the states. Some organizations include indigenous tribes and conservation groups across the United States. Conservation groups argue that the public lands rule will help modernize the BLM and ensure it has the tools to meet future challenges. We've also seen an overwhelmingly positive response to the new rule during the required public commenting time held during the proposal stages. The new rule does not prioritize conservation. It places conservation on an equal footing with other purposes.
Thank you. Let's hear from our final two speakers. Crystal and Harriet, what are your thoughts after hearing these points?
We recognize the promises the BLM continues to make. However, the language of this new rule appears vague and causes concern for those who depend on the land. Without a streamlined process or standard, this system is bound to fail and begin to favor one use over another. As an industry who relies heavily on the use of public land, we worry this new rule is going to open the door for entities to take away land or interfere with major production. We cannot set a precedent of making major changes on government-approved acts without following a proper process. This is simply an overreach of the BLM.
As Crystal referenced, the fear of tomorrow is what urges us to fight for what we feel is right. Instead of following the statutory process required of the BLM, they issued this new public lands rule. This is a clear violation of the expectation placed on the BLM to manage public lands with dignity and consideration for all parties involved. It eliminates multiple use through a corrupted definition of conservation. Wyoming is grateful for all the support from other states and entities as we continue to pursue this lawsuit against the BLM. We will continue to fight for the great state of Wyoming and all it has to offer for public land users.
This panel has expressed knowledge and passion for their subject. Let's take a moment to recap the information shared. In June of 2024, the Bureau of Land Management instituted the new Conservation and Landscape Health Rule, placing conservation as a valid use of land similar to mining, timber, and production. This rule imposes changes, one being the new implementation of conservation leases, and two, the new definition and regulations around areas of critical environmental concern. The BLM and conservationists feel this rule is the next step in safeguarding the way public lands are managed, prioritizing landscape health. Others feel this rule is an overstep of previously implemented congressional documents, resulting in the active lawsuit with the states fighting over the rule, which poses us with one question. Is this rule impeding rights or innovative management?
Do we have a hand mic to pass around? Let's do that. So I failed to coach our judges. So raise your hand when you've got a question, and I'll give you the mic. And don't be shy. They need hard questions too.
So can this be questions about the related material they were, or kind of improvement? Because before we were kind of judging, but is this questions related to what they were talking about?
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah, this is Representative Banks, Vice Chairman of the Ag Committee.
Yes, thank you for being here. Thank you for the presentation. My question goes back, I don't know if you're aware of the Chevron decision of the United States Supreme Court, which basically said that these federal rules are not laws and are not binding. So my question goes to the BLM director. What do you say when you hear that these federal rules are not comparable to laws and are not viable because they are not laws that were enacted by Congress?
I would say that it's important to still be able to follow them like they were laws. I do personally wish that they were laws, but I can't make that decision myself. So while I do wish that everybody would follow them like they follow the laws, I can't expect that out of everybody, but I still have a hope for that.
Thank you. Mr. Attorney, anything to add on that one?
No.
Okay, thank you.
If there, as they go through this process, if there is any information that you can give them to help them answer any of these questions, we'd appreciate that knowledge.
Okay. Next question. Chairman John Winter.
Yes. Well, folks, it was a great presentation. I really thank you for being here. I guess my concern is multiple use and how that plays into your presentation. I know you brought it up, and then you talked about this conservation program. I just have to tell you, I don't think this conservation approach is right and proper. And multiple use is what it's all about, and that's in statute. And so I think you discussed it very well, and but it might be well to understand this conservation program a little more, and whether it's good or bad. I mean, I don't think it's good, but you need to figure that out and put it together in your presentation. But this multiple use is what it's all about. Livestock operators are the best conservationists on the planet, and I mean, most ag folks are. And so I just want to encourage you to learn more about multiple use and this conservation program, maybe to enhance your presentation. So thank you very much for coming.
Good job.
At this point, it would be good to just kind of counter
Yeah.
his, well, I'll bet we've got a question coming here that might help you out, but go ahead.
Yeah, I guess,
Representative Provenza.
thank you, John. I guess my question would be, what would be most helpful from us? Do you want us to ask you questions that help you clarify your argument?
I think any questions are just helpful, like kind of just asking us about our knowledge, or just asking general questions of like kind of what you're like curious about, like if that makes sense.
So arguments that maybe would be helpful for you in sharpening your arguments at the next stage. Okay. One question I had that I think might want to be addressed would be, why do the folks who are pro livestock and grazing think that they have a right to graze their cattle over anyone else who wants to lease the land? So what's the inherent right to you that you should have more rights than someone else? That would be one question. And then I think the other question for the other side would be, you talk about conservation for future generations, and maybe it would be helpful at the next stage to talk about specifically, like, what does that mean? What are what's the carbon offset that has to do with agriculture? Or how does it potentially, what's the relationship with climate change and things of that nature? My committee won't agree with any of the words I just said, but it's just two things that I would like to, I think that would help you explore the next, where you go argue next.
Anyone who would want to answer either of those questions?
Talking about the future generation, I don't have the statistics for the carbon offset right at this moment, but something I did want to put in, something for future generations, is with this new rule, Native American youth is now being able to help out in many different areas, such as a program like Seeds of Success, where they're taking Native American youth and teaching them ways to conserve the land through plants and everything, so their generation knows how to sustainably care for the land.
Yeah, okay, go ahead. And I think a way grazers can feel like they can be put ahead on these leases is because we are a way to feed America. We're trying to make our operations bigger, and the only way we can do this is if we have help from the BLM or other places giving us opportunities to have more to our herds, and adding on more places to feed them, because right now it's not cheap. And so having these leases and being able to take the grasses from these lands to feed our cattle helps a lot to be able to keep our operations running.
Adding to that statement, grazing supports the environmental health of our land. It also strengthens rural economies, reduces wildfire risk, and many other positive impacts on the land that it will provide.
Next question, Representative Davis.
I think economically, you guys need to, conservation, if you take that ground out of development with the conservation easement, how does that play economically in the big picture? I mean, over here with the agricultural and the tribal influence, you're showing positive economic development, but over here with just setting this land aside and deferring all use, what economic development is there with that?
I would say the economic development is through restoring degraded habitats and lands that are in need of restoration so we can use them for conservation and for economic uses, such as in the future using them for grazing or even mining and timber.
I guess my question then is, the meaning of the conservation use is to defer all those things you just said, correct?
Not necessarily, no. It's to help them restore it for a short amount of time and then be able to use them again.
Where with the industry, we continually develop that. After once industry is done, for instance, oil and gas, the land is reclaimed, and usually it's in better shape than it was prior to their footprint on it. But with my understanding of a conservation easement, you defer all use of that, the same way the areas of critical environmental concern, there's, you know, it's back to no impact from humans on there. That's the question I have for you. What is the economic value of that as to the continuing evolving development from agriculture and industry?
While the BLM recognizes that the grazing is and other uses of the land is beneficial, I think that right now we're just trying to restore certain species to the lands that have been pushed away by humans or even by just grazing and other things like that. So I think we're trying to bring that back a little bit.
Director Magagna, Director of the Wyoming Stock Growers.
Thank you, Representative. I've been a public land BLM grazing permittee my entire life, and I always approached it with an ethic of conservation. The decisions I made with how I grazed, the improvements I put on the land were all done with that conservation ethic. When this rule came out and I read this rule, in one sense, it was some relief. I'm no longer responsible for conservation. That's going to be a separate thing handled by different people, and I can just go about my business without being concerned about it. At the same time, I was frightened to think that their idea of how they achieve perhaps the same conservation objectives that I do, but it's going to be very different. They're going to want to do it in ways that are going to interfere with my grazing operation in the way I would achieve those same conservation objectives. So for any of you, can you tell me, is my fear and my concern with that valid, or is it not valid? To feel like instead of being recognized for 50 years of conservation, I'm now being told, you didn't do it right, we need someone else to come in and do the conservation.
I think that's definitely a concern that we have. It makes it so that people are questioning if their lease is up, are they going to get a chance to get another lease to graze their cattle, or if they didn't do good enough, is someone else going to have to do it? And that's where we struggle with this rule, because it imposes a lot of fear on the people because they're trying to restore this land, and so it just leaves us questioning if we are going to get a lease.
Further questions? Chairman Winter.
I have not heard the term preservation come up in your discourse here. So my question is, do you folks understand the difference between preservation and conservation? And it's also my understanding that, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but are not these conservation programs, aren't they designed to be sold on the stock exchange? Could you answer some of that?
Could you hit back to the first part of your question again?
About the conservation versus preservation?
Oh, yeah.
If you could answer something about it.
Yeah.
You know, what you know about that would be good.
You have to forgive us, we're politicians, not judges. And we can ask a question if it takes us all day, so you just go ahead, I'm sorry.
Looking at the difference between preservation and conservation, preservation is where we're not going to use the land at all, to where conservation, we can still go in and use the land for purposes as long as it continues to promote sustainability. So I think that's our big thing, is still being able to use the land while it's sustainable, while it's keeping up sustainability.
Could you possibly restate also the second half of your question, if there was a second half of your question?
Okay, I'll try to make it a little clearer. It's my understanding that this conservation program that's being, I guess it's in the courts right now, that can these programs be sold in any manner on the stock exchange?
That would, okay, so we've worked on a bill that would try to prevent that from happening. And it would be the sale of a conservation easement on public land. sale of, on the stock, traded as a stock on the stock exchange. This is something you probably don't know about, but you can work on later, but
No, I think you're right, it's not something we know, but we will look that up, because I have heard that they wanna do that.
Financial asset companies,
Okay,
the stock exchange never allowed sale of stocks,
right,
so it has not been approved.
I didn't think so, but thank you for that. Natural asset companies,
Yes.
yes.
NACs.
thank you.
Representative Davis.
Could you give me the definition of area of critical environmental concern?
The principal definition of this, one second. The definition reads that the principal BLM designation for these lands is to promote public lands through natural, cultural, and scenic resources, systems or processes, or to protect life and safety from natural hazards. So it's to protect those lands. Do you want me to restate that?
To protect them from what?
Things that could harm it, so anything that will come in and I think it varies by location, so there's not one certain thing that will necessarily harm it, it's multiple things that can come in and harm it.
Okay, I'll try and wrap us up here. So going forward now, with everybody here on this panel, what's the solution? Where do we go? Where do we compromise? What's the final outcome that needs to be reached so that we continue to fall into multiple use, but that we also respect the Taylor Grazing Act and all of these other things that were passed into law, while also trying to favor our state's rights in this that was talked about earlier. If we can kind of, what's the goal and what's the solution here?
I think that like specifically, we really struggle with compromise and hearing each other out and listening to each other. So I think if we could be able to, and I don't know how it's possible in sense of like getting a meeting together, but like I think that the BLM and other like conservationist group like I kind of state is, and ranchers and just people and miners and people that work in timber, they all just need to talk about it and like listen to each other's opinions, and that's like really hard. And because BLM has the public commenting time, but it's just kind of hard to get your say in within it because they just kind of don't necessarily want to listen. I'm not saying that they don't listen, but they just don't want to listen as much to others' opinions if it really differs with theirs.
So kind of down those same lines, my understanding is that this rule was formulated in-house by the BLM, and there wasn't a panel of people discussing this issue. Just, I think that would be this part of the solution, is make sure you've got a panel of people developing rules and things that affect all of America. I don't know if, these were good questions. I do think as important as anything will be developing the environmental part of it and the conservation. So if you can find a group, I don't know who for sure, Wildlife Federation maybe, somebody leaning away from agriculture, maybe leaning away, I'm not sure. It would help you tune up that side of your argument, because it'll be as important as the other side. You got a group of ranchers, and of course you're going to hear only one side and maybe not have solutions. And then the other thing, our daughter was on an ag issues team that won nationals 15, 20 years ago. Don't expect the judges to be very knowledgeable when they talk to you, because one of these judges, theirs was on grazing public lands, and the first thing out of a judge's mouth was, wow, I didn't know we had livestock out on public land. So don't let anything faze you. And they didn't. They went right on into whatever they need to do. If there are things that you're vague on answers, communicate what you know. And I think you did a pretty good job of answering those questions.
You guys are the experts.
Yes. Any further? Representative Proventa.
Thank you. Just to your point about talking about Wyoming Wildlife Federation, so sportsmen's groups, that's one argument and that potentially could be added is in Wyoming, you have the constitutional right to hunt, fish and trap. And often my husband is one of them, will complain about how many cows he's seeing in the area where he's trying to hunt. So that's another potential angle that you could utilize in saying that you're trying to conserve sportsman spaces for future generations as well, and ensuring that cattle aren't harming habitat for mule deer and other ungulates that are struggling in Wyoming.
Well, I'm just also giving a suggestion. We fought this federal rule all through last term for 2 years in this committee. I'm talking about this very same thing. So that's why we're kind of passionate on the multiple use, conservation, all that kind of stuff. But just a suggestion, look into, there's 2 RMPs, they were just rejected. But the Rock Springs RMP was very much on the front lines of this committee, and it goes through all of this stuff. So if you just want to look at the real world impacts and stuff of what the federal rules do like this, that RMP I think would be a good way to just get some further knowledge if you're looking for something like that. So just a suggestion of a real world example there for you.
Well, thank you, presenters. That was outstanding, and judges. We had a lot of fun. This is great. Good luck at state.
Thank you guys for your time.